If you are earning $50,000 today, you aren't living a middle-class life. You are effectively surviving on a 2019 poverty wage. The data from March 2026 has just confirmed what your bank account already told you. The United States has officially entered stage 4 of a structural currency debasement. While the headline inflation numbers were massaged down for years, the sudden 3.3% jump this month, driven by a 19% spike in gasoline and a staggering 44% surge in fuel oil, has stripped the mask off the economy. With the conflict in the Middle East now directly impacting the Strait of Hormuz, the cost of simply existing in America has decoupled from reality. Most people are looking at their paychecks and wondering why they feel poorer despite the raises. The reason is a stage 4 transition, the point where price increases in essentials like energy and food move faster than the currency can be printed to cover them. This isn't just a bad month for the markets. It is the moment the $50,000 salary officially lost its status as a viable living wage in the United States. But this is where it gets serious. The erosion of your purchasing power isn't a side effect of the war. It's the intended outcome of a much larger strategic shift that most analysts are completely missing. To understand why $50,000 feels like $30,000, you have to look at the escalation path that began in 2021. For years, the Federal Reserve maintained that the massive liquidity injections were transitory, but the data from the last 24 months shows a different reality. The transition from stage 3, persistent inflation, to stage 4, structural debasement, was triggered by the February 28th conflict in the Middle East and the subsequent naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz on April 13th. What led us to this specific moment was a combination of unchecked domestic debt and a sudden, violent disruption of global energy flows. When the U.S. Central Command implemented the blockade this week, it didn't just stop tankers, it fundamentally altered the cost of every good transported in America. Historically, we saw similar patterns during the 1970s oil shocks, but the key difference today is our debt to GDP ratio, which now exceeds 130%. The Federal Reserve is currently trapped between two impossible choices: hike rates to save the dollar and collapse the banking system, or print more to fund the war and watch your purchasing power vanish. Hold that thought, because what this means for the global reserve status of the dollar is the part most analysts are missing. The mechanics of this shift started on April 13th at exactly 10 a.m. Eastern Time. After 21 hours of failed negotiations in Islamabad, the U.S. Central Command implemented a targeted naval blockade of all ships entering or exiting Iranian ports. This isn't a standard trade embargo, it's a surgical strike on the seaborne trade that accounts for 90% of Iran's economy. On the other side, the Iranian parliament has remained defiant, with leadership claiming the blockade will be met with symmetrical force. There are reports of mines in the water and a complete halt of global shipping through the strait, as no insurer will cover vessels in a combat zone. But this is where the story changes. Most people assume this is a localized conflict about nuclear ambitions or regional dominance. That is a mistake. The real event isn't the blockade itself, it's the toll system the U.S. Navy is now interdicting. By seizing vessels that have paid Iranian tolls, the U.S. has effectively weaponized the maritime insurance market. This creates a level of uncertainty that makes normal trade impossible. If you value this level of strategic clarity, join our community by subscribing. Understanding these patterns is the only way to stay ahead of the next economic shift. The question now isn't if energy will stay expensive, but who will be left to pay for the protection of what's left. This blockade isn't just a military maneuver, it is a structural realignment of the global economy. For the last 50 years, the petrodollar system relied on one unspoken rule: the guaranteed frictionless flow of energy through the Strait of Hormuz. On April 13th, that rule was deleted. When the U.S. began interdicting every vessel that paid an Iranian toll, we moved from a world of global trade to a world of strategic permission. Economically, what has changed is the risk premium. Shipping insurers have effectively abandoned the region, meaning even safe tankers are now paying war risk premiums that are 500% higher than they were in February. This cost doesn't stay on the ocean. It is a direct tax on the global supply chain that is currently being passed down to every port in the United States. For you, this means the stage 4 reality is no longer a theory. When the primary energy choke point of the world is weaponized, the price of everything from the plastic in your phone to the fertilizer for American wheat spikes. We are seeing a fundamental shift where the U.S. military is now the primary arbiter of who gets to participate in the global economy. If you aren't on the list, you don't trade. And if you don't trade, your currency begins to fail. Most analysts view the blockade as a standard military response to regional aggression. What they are missing is that this is not a combat operation. It is a credit defense operation. The decision makers in Washington aren't focused on Iranian soil. They are focused on the survival of the dollar's role as the global vehicle currency. When Iran announced it would only accept renminbi for transit fees through the strait, it effectively issued a death warrant for the petrodollar system. The strategy behind the U.S. naval response is clear. If you bypass the dollar, you lose access to the physical sea lanes. By interdicting these vessels, the U.S. is attempting to demonstrate that currency dominance is backed by kinetic force. If the renminbi for oil trade is allowed to normalize, the constant global demand for dollars, which allows the U.S. to export its inflation, evaporates overnight. This is the real reason the Federal Reserve cannot pivot to lower interest rates despite the mounting banking stress. They must keep the dollar attractive to foreign creditors while the Navy enforces its usage at gunpoint. It is a high-stakes gamble to prevent a total domestic currency collapse, but the other side tells a different story, and understanding their countermove is essential to seeing how this ends. But the other side tells a different story. If you listen to the official narrative from the Treasury and the mainstream financial press, they argue that the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz is actually a bullish event for the United States. Their strongest argument is that by asserting total maritime dominance, the U.S. is effectively forcing a global flight to safety, which strengthens the dollar and preserves its status as the world's only viable reserve currency. They believe that once Iran capitulates, energy prices will stabilize at a lower baseline, and the $50,000 salary will regain its footing. Take that argument seriously for a moment. It assumes a world that still functions on 20th century rules. But here is the precise gap in that logic. While the U.S. can control the physical water with a carrier strike group, it can no longer control the digital and strategic bypasses already in motion. As we've discussed in our previous deep dives, the BRICS Plus nations aren't planning to fight the blockade. They are simply finishing the infrastructure to ignore it. I've been tracking these pattern shifts with you for a long time, and I appreciate those of you who have subscribed to keep this independent analysis going. Your support allows us to look past the official spin and focus on the data that actually impacts your wallet. The gap between the official recovery story and the Stage 4 reality is where your financial security is either won or lost. This macro geopolitical standoff is already hitting your kitchen table. When Brent crude spiked to $126 per barrel following the Hormuz closure, it triggered a 21.2% jump in gasoline prices in a single month, the sharpest increase on record since 2005. For the average American commuter, this isn't just a number on a screen. It's an extra $200 a month diverted from your savings just to get to work. But the Stage 4 reality goes deeper than the pump. We are seeing a grocery supply emergency, where the 44% surge in fuel oil is being passed directly through the supply chain. While the official CPI might look managed, the Everyday Price Index, which tracks the things you actually buy, vaulted 2.5% in March alone. This is why your $50,000 salary feels like $30,000. Your fixed costs for energy, insurance, and food are expanding while your income remains stagnant. If you're feeling the squeeze, you aren't alone. I'm seeing your comments about rising utility bills and the disappearing middle class. If this analysis is helping you make sense of the chaos, hit the like button so we can reach more people who are trying to protect their families. The pattern is clear. Your purchasing power is being sacrificed to maintain a global strategic position. What happens next to your credit card rates and mortgage stability is the real story most people are ignoring. Based on the pattern of every major energy shock since 1973, here is the analytical timeline for the next 6 months. Short term, 30 to 60 days. Expect the lag effect to break. While the March PPI data showed a 0.5% advance, the 1.6% jump in final demand goods hasn't fully hit the retail shelf yet. By mid-May, the 44% spike in fuel oil and 21% rise in gasoline will manifest as a mandatory surcharge across all logistics sectors. For you, this means a secondary wave of price hikes in non-discretionary goods, specifically protein and grains, as the 2026 Kharif sowing season in Asia faces a 35% fertilizer cost increase due to the Qatari LNG shutdown. Midterm, 3 to 6 months. The probability of the Strait of Hormuz remaining restricted through July is currently at 55%. If shipping does not normalize by the Q3 window, Brent crude will likely establish a new floor above $135. The scenarios. Escalation path, 70% probability. A failure in the current naval interdiction leads to insurance blacklisting of the entire Persian Gulf. In this scenario, the Fed is forced into an emergency liquidity injection to prevent a regional bank collapse, effectively devaluing the dollar further and making that $50,000 salary feel like a 2019 poverty wage of $25,000. De-escalation path, 30% probability. A strategic pivot by the BRICS Plus nations to mediate a maritime neutrality zone. This would stabilize prices but solidify the shift toward a blockchain-based, non-dollar payment system, permanently capping the US dollar's global purchasing power. This is not a temporary dip, it is a structural realignment. If you found this analysis valuable, share this video with one person who still believes the 2019 economy is coming back. The pattern is clear, the data is public, and the window to prepare is closing. What happens when the world's gas station shuts its doors is no longer a theory. It is your 2026 reality.